Hey, greetings everybody, and welcome. I hope Mushroom is feeling better. Yeah. Yay, good. Good. All right. Good. Well, it's lovely to be here with everybody, and welcome to Mahamudra for the people. We finished that text by Nakfopa or Krishnacharya last week, and so we will move on to the next text in this collection, which is attributed to the Mahasiddha Maitrepa. Maitrepa is one of my personal favorites. He was a student of this wild Mahasiddha yogi, perhaps also maybe Shavaripa, who might have had more of kind of like a tribal, like indigenous kind of point of orientation. When you see him, he's always wearing this like skirt made of peacock feathers, and he really appeared to come from kind of like a little bit more of a non-traditional Indic location. And Shavaripa also was credited with revealing both white and black Siksar Mahakala practice. And there's a cave about, well, two caves actually, about, I don't know, maybe like 14 kilometers from Bodh Gaya on this mountain called Mahakala Mountain. And one of these caves, one was one that Shavaripa spent a lot of time in personal meditation retreat in, and then there's another one that the Buddha spent time in, or Siddhartha, before he became enlightened. And then there's another cave where Shavaripa, had these visions of both white and black Siksar Mahakala. Maitrepa, on the other hand, was a great scholar, and a little bit like in the story of Naropa, it became evident that he had a very good intellectual understanding of Dharma, but was lacking the practical experience. So he set out looking for a guru, and he and a partner, travel partner or Dharma partner, and they kept happening upon this kind of wild, weird yogi person named Shavaripa. And each time, according to at least one of the biographies of Maitrepa, he was so kind of turned off by Shavaripa's appearance that he was like, "Oh no, thank you. I definitely don't want any instruction from you, because you seem crazy." And one of the kind of interactions, Shavaripa was eating lice out of his hair, and I think probably trying to provoke, Maitrepa's, like goody two shoes, kind of qualities. And then at one point, Maitrepa's traveling companion kind of got worn down, and he was like, "You know what, man? Like, screw it. I'm going to, take, this guy's instructions." And he did, and he had this profound awakening experience. And then Maitrepa became very, very depressed. And in one of the biographies, he attempted to commit suicide a few times because he was just so distraught. He was really at his kind of wit's end. And then one last time, Shavaripa showed up and was like, "What are you doing? Why would you throw your life away?" And Maitrepa kind of explained to him, "I don't know if I can trust you." Basically, this is kind of like a very modern story in a way. And he was like, "Okay, well, try it out." And so Maitrepa kind of, worn down, was just like, "Okay, fine, I will try your instructions." I went off into the forest to meditate and had, good experiences. And then Shavaripa came to check in on him and check his experiences, and indeed saw that Maitrepa had realized Mahamudra. And then Maitrepa became very, very excited and was like, "Oh, this is wonderful. I'm going to join you here, in the wilds of these jungles and be a Mahasiddha like you." And then Shavaripa tells him, "That's a pretty bad idea. you should return back to the monastery and write about these, write about Mahamudra, which he did. And so he wrote this collection of songs. This is one of them. And actually, fortuitously, Gyaltsen Rinpoche right now is giving the transmission at the Sermon Kaju monastery known as Lingdam, just opposite Rumtek right now, including this whole cycle of songs. And I've received almost all of the Maitripa literature, the transmission from Gyaltsen Rinpoche, from all of it. There are a couple that I still need to receive from him. Maitripa became a Mahamudra teacher for Marpa, and this is one of the ways that this practice ended up in the Kaju tradition. And I've had a number of really kind of beautiful dreams about Maitripa, so he's kind of very close to my heart. So it's a real joy to be here to explore the song with you all. So this is called the Doha Song of the View, Meditation, Conduct, and Result. And in Sanskrit, it would be Bhavaditi Charya Pala Doha Gati Nama. And it begins with an homage to Arya Manjushri. So he begins by saying homage to Arya Manjushri. And then he starts off with the first stanza. The variety of individual phenomenon are one's own mind. All of samsara and nirvana are inseparable. Buddhas and all beings are inseparable, as in the example of water and its waves. Right, and so in this way, we can I guess address the first line. The variety of all the individual phenomena are one's own mind. This has everything to do with the fact that everything that arises, everything that we see, experience, is basically given some kind of sense of reality based on our labeling and projection. So the meaning we project onto things, and all of the labeling. So where I'm sitting in my living room right now, and there's this there are plants, and there is art on the wall, and there's a globe for my kids to learn about the world, and there's a table and chairs, right? And all of these things can be experienced just quote unquote as pure appearance, which would be to be experienced without labeling, right? Without even designation of labeling around color, right? Just allowing ourselves to be able to experience directly without labeling, projection, imputing any kind of meaningness, just letting everything arise without the baggage, without the noise, without the effort of just constantly reacting, right, to our ideas about the way things happen to be. So the variety of individual phenomena are one's own mind. This is what's meant. All of samsara and nirvana are inseparable, right? And so samsara, speaks directly to the experience of our suffering. This, for some reason, for me today, is a day of pronounced suffering, right? So this is very alive for me, as is this kind of recognition of the fact that all one needs to do in these particular moments of suffering and difficulty is to be able to rest directly within the experience of whatever is arising and look into it, as it were, to see where this is, right? Where is my suffering? Where is my pain? Ultimately, we can never find anything. And there's an element of frustration that can arise sometimes when we are suffering because we want to suffer. Suffering causes this very kind of pronounced, form of ego clinging, egotism, so to speak. And it's not to say that suffering is inherently egotistical, but suffering promotes this self. So in my particular case, this sense of justin, right? So part of me wants to probably wallow in my suffering, and then another part of me wants to be able to rest into the rainbow lake nature of suffering. When we're able to rest into the rainbow lake nature of suffering, or the illusory nature of suffering, this is where samsara and nirvana are able to be experienced as inseparable, right? So in fact, I was talking with somebody yesterday who was joking about, or half joking, they were a little serious about how once they achieve awakening, then they won't have, physical pain and things like this. And, the thing is that nirvana isn't this kind of like Western kind of, going to heaven, everything is perfect, and everyone's singing the angels, and all of a sudden we're ripped and everybody likes us and we have no problems, and our all of this. That's not it. We still have our same kind of foibles, our same personality, our same in some cases, with some people, irritability and all of the things, that come up, right? So basically, after an awakening experience, then we see how ordinary the whole thing is and how ordinary we are, and we need to continue to work to integrate this. Buddhas and beings, or Buddhas and sentient beings, are essentially inseparable, such as in the example of water and waves. And this is a kind of calling out, or call to, or call to action, we could even say, around Buddha nature, or Sujata Garbha, or this enlightened essence, that each one of us has exactly the same enlightened essence of all Buddhas, of the 3 times and 10 directions. There is no difference. There can never be a difference. Okay? When I was in Sikkim last summer with Gyaltsen Rinpoche, we were discussing a little bit this Terma text called "The Sounds of Reality," and he became very, very animated at one point, and was telling me, we have to remember that all beings, no matter how small and seemingly inconsequential, a mosquito, a fly, a gnat, every single being has exactly the same essence, right? They are the same as us. We are the same as a Buddha. And he was like getting really, really, really excited. He was like, this is the most important thing. Never forget this. Don't forget this. Animals are awakened. Insects are awakened. Ghosts are awakened. Humans are awakened. Hell beings. Every single being has exactly the same nature. Right? And so this is this kind of point here that my trip is beginning with. Buddhism and all sentient beings are inseparable, as in the example of water and its waves, right? We can say, yes, there's a difference between a wave and water, but really, in essence, there isn't. It's just a matter of appearance. And so the next stanza my Tripa goes on with is the mind's nature, which is without things or without nothing, eliminates on the instantaneous path of the realization of the yogin the suffering of samsara, which has the nature of darkness, like a small candle that overcomes great darkness, right? And so kind of going a little backwards in explaining this, and I believe it is, was it Shantideva, I think, who said that, a lighting a candle, right, in a cave that's been dark for aeons, right, instantaneously, that darkness that's been there for aeons is completely dissipated. And in the same way, this practice of resting into the mind's essential nature eliminates all of the suffering of samsara, and the nature of the darkness, the struggle, the suffering, the pain, the anxiety, the brokenness, the lackluster nature of samsara. All of this stuff can be eliminated instantaneously, based on the realization of the yogini or yogin, right? Just by letting the mind recognize its own nature, right? When the mind is able to recognize its own nature, it's able to see that it is not something and it is not nothing, right? everything that arises is experienced through mind. And when I say mind, I don't mean, just mental, right? It's not that everything that we see and experience is just a product of mind, and that's all it is, because, on a relative level, there's the form aspect of things, there's color, there's sound, etc. But it's the essence of it, right? The thingness, the separateness, within the context of the dualistic experience, right? When we're able to rest into non-duality, and everything is able to be experienced freely, naturally, without subject and object, without self and other, then this kind of essencelessness of phenomenon and the essencelessness of mind is able to be experienced. When that is experienced, suffering begins to dissolve naturally, right? Because we become free of labeling, discursiveness, conceptuality, etc. Does that make sense? Yeah, yay. So then he goes on to say, the Mahamudra, or Great Seal, or we could say Mahamudra, the Great Seal, the union that transcends the intellect, is clarity and non-thought, right? Brought together like space, which pervades all things and is vast, which is naturally compassionate, which is appears without reality, like the moon reflected in water, right? So Mahamudra, this union that transcends the intellect of clarity and non-thought like space, right? So clarity is this ability to be able to experience, right? Non-thought being very different than some kind of shamatha like experience, where in shamatha there's a little bit of kind of forcefulness or effort, right, at stilling the mind or causing the mind to experience quiescence, right? With this, we are naturally resting into the cessation of thought and clarity, which is basically clarity, we could say in one way, is almost like code for the way in which awareness is able to apprehend the way mind is experienced or arises, the way in which phenomena is experienced and arises. Right? And when it does this, right, this experience of Mahamudra, which is clarity and spacious non-thought, is pervasive, it's vast, and it is compassionate in nature, right? So this too kind of, we find, very similarly in Dzogchen, this kind of sense that, or description that compassion is naturally arising from Rigpa, or from the natural state, which is nice because it means that we don't need to go to do something like go to the post office and buy compassion stamps and lick them and put them on everything, right? Compassion is, and this is an interesting thing to begin to consider. Perhaps compassion isn't ours to give, right? Perhaps compassion just is by the very nature of our being, right? And I think that there's actually a little bit of wisdom in this kind of thinking, because when we think that compassion has to be cultivated, and then it is my product with which I am going to, wheat paste. For example, like I'm in New York City right now, and today's the day Trump is turning himself in to be indicted. So there are all these people not that far away, maybe 6 or 7 miles from where I am, who are protesting and angry on both sides of the political spectrum. Natural arising compassion, you can move into that space thinking that I have a limited amount of compassion to be able to bring to all of these people who are suffering and arguing and going back and forth, right? And we can also begin this, within the context of the practice of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, begin to be curious about how compassion just naturally arises of its own accord. Right? And it is endless. It is sourceless. It has no end, right? It has no limitation. And there is no one of us who has to hold it and be the bearer of it. which I think is also particularly useful too. Right. So a Buddha, and kind of by extrapolation, a Buddha is never, fearful of losing their compassion. Right. And what's also very interesting too is even, something that maybe I'm getting off topic here, but we, is worth exploring is this idea of compassion fatigue. Right. So Mahamudra and Dzogchen as a perhaps antidote to compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue arises especially when we feel tapped out, right? We feel like we're losing our ability to be able to be open, responsive, non-judgmental, etc. Right. And though we also tend to assume that all of that is a limited resource. And within the context of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, that is an impossibility. Right. And this is something that is worth, all of us exploring for many different reasons. Yeah, and so moving on to the next stanza, Maitrapa goes on to say, clear and free from the ideas of edge and center, unstained by anything, free from the impurities of hope and fear, like a mute's dream, it is indescribable. The measurelessness, great bliss, which has the nature of wisdom, is like the moonlight and sunlight, not restricted, or like moonlight and sunlight, not restricted in any direction. Right. So mind, our mind, the experience of Mahamudra is clear and free from center or edge. Right. So there is no center, like we are not the center, and we are also not the edge. And it begs the question too, I think each one of us would really benefit from kind of pondering this or taking a little bit of time to contemplate, what does an edgeless and centerless experience of mind actually mean? Right? How is that experience? Right. So where is the edge of your mind? Is it your room, like the walls that are, or is it even closer, right? Is it here, or is it 10 feet out from your home? Or does it go on forever in every direction, right? With no center, no edge. One of the benefits of this is this helps us to be able to remove ourselves from the pain and the suffering of being the center point, right? We are not the center point because there is no center point. This is one large experience that just happens to be occurring, right? And it is occurring universally, right? I.e., everywhere. And mind essence is occurring everywhere. It is unstained by anything. It is free from the impurities of hope and fear. Like a mute's dream, politically incorrect, but whatever. Like a mute's dream, it is indescribable, right? So it's like having and like the Kaju, Milam Lungta Che Sadhana at the end, there's this description that the nature of mind is like the tasting of sugar or sweets by a mute, right? It can't be described, right? And this is the classical problem, both with Mahamudra and Dzogchen, is that this experience tends to evade description. In fact, I was reading a little bit, the Marpa Kaju, volume, the first half of the Marpa Kaju volume from the Damnatsa has just been translated, and I was reading the introduction to Saraha's People. It was a People Doha. I can't remember which one it was, but anyway, Saraha, another great Mahasiddha, of the Mahamudra tradition, and might be the founder of the whole kind of lineal practice of Mahamudra. He was a great scholar too, and then he ended up meeting this woman who was an arrow maker who became his spiritual companion and probably also teacher to some extent. He saw the way she was making arrows and knew that she was incredibly realized, right? The way that she was, demonstrating the movements of her hands, the way she was making the arrows, etc. And in kind of meeting her and interviewing her, he was like, "Oh, you're very realized, aren't you?" And she was basically like, "Yes, I am, but I don't teach with words. I teach with symbol, right?" And this is a really beautiful way of, and you do find this, and some teachers still today do teach this way, teaching with symbol and not with word or intellect, because again, especially in the West, we are so intellect heavy, right? Um, and whatever, this is, on one level our benefit, it's also our kind of shadow, right? Maybe to the extent that we're creating this artificial intelligence that has the power to perhaps one day take over the world. This is how much we value that. It'd be interesting if we were different. Perhaps we would make artificial intelligence that was just a manifestation of Mahamudra or Dzogchen, this natural arising compassionate algorithm that could meet the needs of all beings. That sounds a lot better, a lot more poetic too. So it's indescribable. It's measurelessness, great bliss, right? So it's the experience of it is blissful. And then of course, when we think of bliss, we think of some kind of thing like, winning the lottery or just like having every possible need met, right? But the blissfulness of this it's not that kind of bliss, right? It's also not, necessarily any kind of like erotic bliss either. It's just this everything just is. Oh, everything's okay, right? I'm okay, the universe is okay, etc. Right? And this bliss has the nature of wisdom. Right? And it is like moonlight and sunlight in the sense that it cannot be restricted in any direction. So it's a beautiful clear day here in Brooklyn, and the sun is shining, and it is shining in every direction, right? With the exception of building some wall across the sun or some kind of bizarre thing like that, the sun just shines, right? And its rays are, they just move in an uninterrupted way, and exactly the same, with the moonlight, and exactly the same with the nature of mind. It is not restricted in any direction. So then he goes on to say, "Hey ho, the self-originated yoga is wondrous. The uncontrived natural mind is Dharmakaya." Right? Self-originated yoga is wonderful, is wondrous, right? So self-originated meaning it is basically just, naturally arising as it does from where it is. And the uncontrived natural mind, this mind that is not prone to labeling, to conceptuality, to discursiveness, to trying to figure anything out, trying to control the situation. When the mind is able to be left free of all of this, right? Uncontrived natural mind, it is the Dharmakaya, right? This is the mind of all the Buddhas. And he goes on to say, the contrived mind, conceptual mind, cannot attain this yoga. Therefore, it is seen as going in the direction of bliss. Right? So our conceptual mind, no matter how much we debate, no matter how much we try and figure things out, no matter how much we try and impute, meaning, etc., it's just never going to do the same thing, right? When we are able to let go of the contrived mind and rest into this non-conceptual nature, then everything has a way of arising blissfully, i.e., with ease, naturalness. I mean, we could even say appropriately. Like everything arises appropriately. And appropriately meaning, just like the reflection of a mirror or in a mirror arises appropriately. It arises the way that it does. It can't arise as anything other than itself. So then he goes on to say, the naturally accomplished yoga is so blissful. As it is free from thought, it is impossible to long for peace. These words are spoken by me, right? The Siddha Maitreya. Right? The naturally accomplished yoga is so blissful. As it is free from thought, it is impossible to long for peace. So this, in previous sessions, yeah, I've mentioned this term amanasikara, right? Which also this comes from Maitreya, and Maitreya wrote fairly extensively about amanasikara. And amanasikara primarily being this experience of the cessation of thought, right? And not a forced cessation of thought, like, again, like some kind of shamatha experience where one is kind of trying to will, some kind of end to or cessation of thought activity. But it is letting thought exhaust itself so that it just cannot arise any longer. Right? In this experience of amanasikara, of mind being left alone, conceptuality not having the ability to arise, is the ground of bliss and is the ground of nirvana. Kind of like full stop. So we find this very similarly in Dzogchen too, where the kind of machinations of conceptual mind, or sem, are able to be let go of, so they naturally stop. And what dawns is the experience of Rigpa, right? This self-luminous, naturally clear, naturally aware expression of the awareness of all things. Right? So, this is why he says this is free of thought, free from thought. And while we are in this experience free from thought, it is impossible to long for peace. Oh yeah, so amanasikara. Yeah. So there's what's his name? Klaus Dieter Matthes wrote this book called a fine it's called A Fine Blend, Madhyamaka and Mahamudra, about Maitreya's Mahamudra, which is kind of worth taking a look at. And actually, you can find it, I think, you might even be able to find it on academia.com. I think I've seen PDFs of it. I remember when it came out. It was published by, I think, the University of Vienna. It's worth getting into if you're into Mahamudra. Let's see. Yes, a fine blend of Mahamudra and Madhyamaka. I like the fine blend on this. It's like a good spice. So then he goes on to say, hey ho, in this practice of the view of yoga, my body, this mountain, is the supreme place. My mind, the practitioner of the yoga of time, binds the senses, creates the retreat boundary, and becomes blissful. This is very interesting because, or maybe interesting to some people, but here, there's particularly my body, this mountain, is the supreme place. We find this metaphor actually used in many, many places. We find it used in Hatha Yoga. We also find it sometimes used even in Zen, right? To sit like a mountain, right? So there is this, it's called like chojak, like, one of these 4 instructions to allow your body to rest like a mountain, right? And in resting like a mountain, you are resting into this experience of immutability, right? Like a mountain, mountains typically, last I checked, but I don't talk to them often, don't experience anxiety, right? Or this, flitteriness, or this flutteriness, or this lack of stability, right? So, when he says, in this practice of the view of yoga, he's not talking about, Ashtanga yoga or hot yoga or, all of the popular, modern yogas we know of in the West. He's talking about the ultimate yoga, the yoga of Mahamudra. In this practice of the view of yoga, my body, our body, this mountain is the supreme place, right? Settling into this presence of the supreme immutable place or experience of this practice. Our mind, right, is the practitioner of the yoga of time. Right? Our mind is beyond time. Right? Our mind is the practitioner of this yoga. And it binds the senses and creates the retreat boundary and becomes blissful. It's a binding the senses. So, this almost is a little similar to instructions we find in illusory body that also happen to be rooted in the Guhya Samaya Tantra of what's called the three isolations: isolation of body, isolation of speech, and isolation of mind. Right? And so this isolation of body is to rest with stability in the meditation posture. Isolation of mind is to be able to let mind be completely free and unadulterated. Right? Easy, relaxed, not doing anything, not controlling anything, not making meaning, right? We're not, sorry, chaplains, we're not making meaning. Sorry, psychologists, we're not explaining things. Sorry, analysts, we're not pondering the depths of mythology to see how, a lot of these archetypal stories might be recreated. We're dropping everything. This is where this kind of practice is very countercultural. We're dropping every single reference point, even reference points that we might not necessarily even be so conscious of. This is what makes it cause a break in the experience of samsara, because we're losing the samsaric reference point, I guess you could say. Right? In this way, we're binding the senses. So we're letting the senses occur right within the context of this yoga. This creates the retreat boundary. So, and very, very, very similar to actually what we find in Guhya Samaya literature and what we find in illusory body literature, that this, settling into the three isolations, the isolation of body, the isolation of speech, and the isolation of mind, is what creates the retreat-like experience in the midst of our lives. So if you're going to the plant store, after this class, I'm going to go pick up my kids from school. So as I go there and I wait with all the other parents, walk down, streets, the mean streets of Brooklyn, right, with the three isolations: isolation of body, isolation of speech, isolation of mind, makes that a retreat boundary. So in one particular way, for the yogini or the yogi who practices Mahamudra, every single place is a retreat location. Right? And everything also has the opportunity to become the nature of bliss. Right? We're kind of destroying these ideas we have about practice having to be a particular way. Right? We're destroying this, need for everything to always be Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Om Shanti, because we can be, engaging everything. Right? And ironically, when we're able to engage everything, then everything does become Om Shanti in its own right. Right? So then he goes on, and to this point, he says, even distractions are not deliberately abandoned. Right? So we don't abandon distractions. Right? So maybe everybody is protesting on both sides, right, down by the courthouse where Trump is being going to be arraigned. Right? Even that's not a distraction. Right? That should not be abandoned. Right? When encountered, if known as the mind, they are the Yidam deity. Knowledge is not drawn in, and thoughts are gradually eliminated. If thoughts arise in the mind, the yogini rests naturally, like cotton or wool, right? Like cloth, just resting naturally, like the clothes on your own body, right? The clothes on our body are not stiff, right? They're not, the clothes on our body are not freaking out. Hopefully, the clothes on our body are not anxious, right? The clothes on our body are not like, oh boy, like I wish they didn't pick me today. I'd rather be wherever I was before they put me on. Right? And so, when distractions arise, do not abandon them, right? When we encounter them, if we're able to encounter them with this full acknowledgement that this is my mind, right? So even if somebody comes and ruffles all of our feathers, that's my mind, right? This is my mind. Yeah, I was reading this. Is everyone here familiar? I'm sure a lot of people are with How the Swans Came to the Lake. This book by Rick Fields. Oh no! Oh, you should check it out. I don't have it right here. It's in another room, but it's this really interesting book, and actually a new edition just was published by the same publisher, which I think it was Shambhala. But it's a very great history of Buddhism coming to the West. And the nephew of Rick Fields is a friend of mine, Benjamin Bogan, and they just reprinted it, and Ben wrote like a new introduction. He actually wanted to talk about Bhumi Sparsha in it, but it didn't make the cut in the in it. But anyway, it's interesting because was it today? I believe is according to the Western calendar, the anniversary of Trungpa's death, and there's he writes really well about all of the yanas and all of the the history of Buddhism coming to primarily North America, and does a really good job of describing what happened with Shambhala and all of this stuff. But so I was reading it partially because of that, and partially because I just wanted to reread the part about the 16th Karmapa. But there's a good example of there's a Kalmuk Mongolian teacher who lived in New Jersey named Geshe Wangyal, who was Bob Thurman and what's his name, Jeffrey Hopkins' teacher. And I was reading what he liked to do was provoke jealousy amongst all the people who would come and study with him, like jealousy and fear and anxiety, so that everybody eventually would get jealous of one another, and then they would have to recognize that as their own mind, right? And then after that, once Geshe Wangyal kind of recognized that, oh yeah, see, they're learning that like I can make them jealous of one another, and they can experience the jealousy, but then they can also get over it really quickly. They can recognize it as their mind. So anyway, this is not the only reason why I brought this whole long thing up. So when encountered, right, every kind of distraction, if we can realize it as our mind, right, they're no different than the Yidam deities. So they're no different than Tara, than Medicine Buddha, than Chakrasambhara, than Vajrayogini, Hayagriva, whatever one practices, right? But not just the Yidam deity, they are the nature of Mahamudra, right? Knowledge is not drawn in, and thoughts are gradually eliminated, right? So knowledge, just conceptual, reification, we're not drawing that in, right? Thoughts become naturally eliminated, right? And when thoughts are eliminated, even when they come up, right? Even when they come or they arise, as yoginis and yogis, we rest naturally like the clothes on our body. And when we do, everything settles once again. So then he goes on to say, abandon action. Let the mind look at itself. If desire arises, know it to be the maras. The root of thoughts, well, I guess that's no, this is, altogether. The root of thoughts is the mind. As that does not exist, thoughts do not exist. With mindful awareness, or without mindfulness, the meditating yogini examines the mind, and as it does not exist, it merges into himself or herself, right? And so, first point being abandon action. Let the mind look at itself. This is also very hard for especially Americans, right? We must be doing all the time. If we're not doing, we are lazy. So, Maitreya is saying abandon action, abandon Dharma practice that is controlling, abandon Dharma practice that is self-conscious in the sense of a me doing something, right? Abandon Dharma practice in which there is something over there to be accomplished. Right? Abandon Dharma practice where there is self and other, right? We're resting into natural, reflexive non-duality. And there's, in the beginning, well, one really has to kind of work at this. Right? Because the first thing that happens is, oh, me, I am sitting here. I am sitting. So can you, do you want to unmute yourself, Lorena, and explain more about your question? Yeah. Oh, whoops. So this funny setting, I guess one has to.
Thanks.
You should be able to now, Lorena. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. I'm here. Oh, so grateful to be here with you all. Yeah, I'm glad I was able to catch your talk at least now. Yeah, I want to apologize, but I don't want to apologize for being late. That's my way of saying.
Don't.
Anyways, yeah, my mind is definitely racing today. I just took a shower and I kept trying to come back to the body and just like, okay, I'm here, like I'm trying to name and notice, okay, looking out the window right now, snow falling. But there's this tension in my chest. There's something happening with my mother and I've got all these storylines going.
Mm-hmm.
And so when one is like, the amygdala is hijacked and there's this tension in the body, what are your thoughts about, okay, just labeling it thinking, but it's not thinking, it's feeling. It's this constriction in my body. And sometimes I can lay there and just be open to presence, to feeling that constriction. I've been playing with noticing, like naming what it is, oh, sadness or fear or that kind of thing. But is that labeling itself like, I don't know, wondering your thoughts about how to practice with this in a Mahamudra way that allows for experience to be what it is and helps us carry on.
Yeah, no, great question. Thank you. So in one way of kind of approaching this, we could say that things are what they are, but they don't need us to define them, right? And I think that this is more of quote unquote the Mahamudra way in the sense that everything is happening. And yes, there are causal factors, right, for everything that might be experienced, either in terms of physical sensation or even thought activity, right? Like some kind of thing is happening, an experience happens which causes our mind to reel. The recognition of the causal factor does nothing for the practice of Mahamudra, right? The recognition of causal factor only helps feed the storyline of either Lorena or Justin or anybody here being, an existent thing. Right? And even labeling, like this practice of letting go of labeling. So letting go of even things that are happening outside, like, well, nothing apparently right now. There's a person walking, right? So like, rather than like, person walking, just letting being happen, right? Even with our own sense of overwhelm, right? Like I was found this really nice quote from the present Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who was talking about one of the last instructions he received from his root teacher, who was the previous Trulshik Rinpoche. And he asked Trulshik Rinpoche, like, what are the two most important things? And Trulshik Rinpoche said the first important thing is to recognize your mind. Right? And then the next thing is to look directly into that experience and understand what that means. So it's a little, it's like answering his question almost with a reflected question back, like, what is the nature of your mind, right? So rather than going into our story, right, which is pretty much kind of like what our culture asks us to do, and we let go of that, right? And we come back into, and use the word, I think you used the word presence, right? Resting into direct presence. Right? And this is why I like to use the terms like, resting like a tree, or like a rock, or like a bird. But it's resting as anything other than this bubbling, human who is needing to try to figure out why it is that they're feeling what they're feeling. And it's not that the why doesn't matter, but it's that the why is as illusory as everything else. Right? What is most important is the direct experience of what is arising in the moment. Right? And so when it says, in the text, like, abandon action, let the mind look at itself. Right? Abandon all reference point, right? Self and other, outside, inside, etc. And just look directly at the experience. So meaning, rest into awareness of the presence of this particular moment.
Lama, can I add something?
Mhm.
So this is my favorite practice. I love Mahamudra, like, just let go of everything.
Mhm.
But I've noticed when, like, sometimes in the morning, I like to stay laying in bed and just open up to open awareness, sense into whatever I'm feeling, and be present with my soma, if nothing else, with my body. But what I found, like today, I start doing that, and then like pilot comes in and it's like, get up. So I literally sometimes, like, move the covers, and it's like I get into it, it's just hard. So in moments of wanting to open up, I guess I'm asking, is the mind does its thing, so then we can come back to that and, like, okay, observe that. It's just really hard sometimes, right?
Mhm.
When there's so much going on. And that's when, I guess, you sit as like a mountain, and preferably in focus, and you just keep coming back and coming back.
Or go for a walk. I mean, I did this yesterday. Yeah, go for a walk, and then while walking, try to, I don't know, maybe I'm the only person who does this, but while walking, try to let go completely of reference point, right? And let your experience of awareness go like a kite, or when sitting at, the table in the morning while you're having whatever you have for breakfast, or even if it's just like drinking coffee or tea, just stop, experience and let go. This can be done everywhere. And sometimes it's actually more beneficial to do it in the middle of activities that might be less assumed to be moments of meditation, because this is where this kind of like real radical shift becomes felt more viscerally. And then you're like, oh, yes, right. Justin, right? It's like shake myself out of myself kind of thing. Now there's clarity, right? Now I'm coming back into direct experience things. Right? Sometimes it's just listening to another person talk to us. Today is a very samsaric day for me, so I was like, oh, okay, well then I'm gonna go to the hardware store, and if I'm feeling shitty, then fine. Let me just at least take care of a couple things that need to be done at home. So I'll go to the hardware store, get the things I need for that. And then the very chatty man at the hardware store totally broke my just reeling in my mind, right? And I was like, oh yes, you are my kind, person right now, because now it's all clear. Like now I'm just listening to you. I'm out of this cycle of conceptuality. Oh, today, blah blah blah. Oh, I need to like fix this drain in the shower head and blah blah blah. Right? But now this person who is just full of snarkiness totally allowed me to break that cycle, right? And so the more we can move into one thing, one experience into the next experience, into the next experience with, just letting everything happen and arise without us being, without me being like a typical Brooklyn person, be like, all right, man, don't talk to me right now. I'm not in the mood. Right? Today it was like me being like, oh, like, this wisdom being is like using his snarkiness to break me out of my suffering. Right? So like that, like it doesn't always have to be Om Shanti. And again, this is why like in both Mahamudra and Sokshan, I like to say that these kinds of practices are like they're the ultimate like green practice, because it allows us to be able to use every single thing that comes our way, right? It's like recycling or composting phenomenon. Every single thing becomes a potential trigger, allowing us to rest, freely into the unadulterated experience of phenomenon, right? But it helps for us to get comfortable with just experimenting with that. So everything from like stubbing one's toe, that could be something that jolts us, right? Or burning our mouth on hot tea or coffee, or loud noises.
I think that's really helpful. I'm sorry, I just wanted to
Mhm.
share. Like I was just washing my hands and listening to you and feeling the tension in my body, and it was like, oh, there's a lot of things going on here. So then I brought my attention to my fingertips and like, okay, moving the soap around, and that helped a little. But when you gave this example of the snarky Brooklyner, at the hardware store, like sometimes the mind, like the walk is brilliant, like go out and maybe listen to some music, do something to jolt us out of ourselves, because it's that navel gazing I'm trying to fix, the dysregulation in me that just not trying to fix, but just paying attention to it can be so overwhelming. It just continues to spin. So going outside of oneself, speaking to another person, walking, different things can help, and paying full attention to that rather than when we're in the spin cycle and we're trying to live our lives and it's really hard.
Totally.
Does that?
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, right, and like this is all a little relative, like, in kind of classical contemplation on the nature of samsara, we're asked to remember that there ain't no way of fixing this, right? This is just the way it is, right? And so the fixing piece is just out. That's impossible, right? What we can do is tame our mind. That is the only thing we can do. This, part of my funk was created by having a really lovely conversation with a dear friend on Friday who does a lot of stuff at the intersection of environmentalism and Dharma. And, they're like, we're screwed. Like, this is not going to work. Humans don't have the capability to address this because Buddhists don't have the capability to come together around this, because we're also divided and don't have similar values. And the reality of this is that, it's probably a human nature thing that we just can't come together to, ironically, fix the slow moving disaster that we all know is coming. But then we see also the same thing with AI, right? There's this article that's been going around in Time magazine, an article in Time magazine I read yesterday about, it was basically a letter from the AI community saying that AI technology should stop for 6 months. And this one scientist was saying, it's too late. 6 months isn't enough time. And the one thing that will happen if AI goes all the way that we think it will, we will all die, like as a species, because it will just undo us all, because that's what it is programmed to do. Right. So why I'm bringing this up is not to make everyone as depressed as I've been, but it is to remember that, like, all we can do is transform our mind in the face of some of these things, right? And so this is why making use of everything is the only thing we can do. And if we're truly going to transform our mind, we're truly going to try to realize Mahamudra or Dzogchen or whatever, right, we have to get comfortable with remembering what is fixable and what is not, right? What is addressable and what is not. Right? And this is not to say, oh, don't go out and make change. But it does mean, like, don't deplete yourself, because much of the transformation of samsara happens through direct experience of our mind. This is the thing that changes that. Right? We have, as humans, we have still yet to find a system of governance that is not samsaric. We've had it all, right? And you still find on Facebook like weirdos who are like, we need Dharma monarchs. Like, that's not going to solve it, right? There's suffering in Bhutan, there's suffering in Nepal, right? Nepal isn't a monarchy anymore. There is a monarch there, but all of the different forms of democracies that exist, from parliamentary to representational to, so this is where getting really experimental has to become part of our work, right? And getting really experimental has to mean, like, what is going to work for my suffering? And this is what I've been spending a lot of time contemplating lately, is like, what is the real thing that's going to work? Right? And then, at least if I'm rooted in awakening, then as the world falls apart, I will be more resilient to be able to be there for myself and others. Right? That's kind of all we've got. But it's better than what we have now, which is like scrolling through the news and like falling into a pit of despair and then being stuck in there, and just feeling that. Yes, Eric. Yeah. Yeah. So, this is an interesting line: abandon action, let the mind look at itself. If desire arises, know it to be the Maras, right? And so this isn't like, oh, I desire like a better brand of coffee. This is attachment, right? Attachment and clinging. Right? And this is interesting too, because just as much as like feeling into what control, like how control manifests in our practice. Like sit down to practice and see how much you are trying to change the situation. If you're trying to change the situation, you are controlling, right? What does it mean to practice in a very passive and docile way, right? A submissive way, right? In the sense of, submitting to the natural state, getting out of our conceptuality, especially this, how conceptuality is connected to this hubris of humans being able to figure everything out. We, the arbiters of justice, we, the arbiters of ego justice, we, the arbiters of every kind of justice. Right? Justice is a concept. Concepts are flawed. It's very depressing. But hey, I don't know. I don't know how to be yeah. Yes. Yeah. These are good comments, y'all. So Maitrapa goes on to say, the root of thoughts is the mind. As that does not exist, thoughts do not exist. With mindfulness or without mindfulness, the meditating yogini or yogin examines the mind. And as it does not exist, it merges into themselves. Right. And so this, rather than turning our meditation into, this is the interesting thing about awareness and the maintenance of awareness. The maintenance of awareness is not necessarily an active phenomenon. We just need to open up to its constant presence. Right? If we're able to relax into the constant presence of awareness, right, Rigpa, then it's just able to be. As it just is, this is the way that everything begins to just merge into this direct experience, right? The yogini or yogi who examines the mind finds that it does not exist. Right? Which is great, because it means that there's nothing to hold on to. There's nothing to freak out about. There's nothing to get, anxious about. No clinging. And curiosity, yes, but not as a motive. Right? If you can try and let curiosity just be the act of resting, with no doing, and then just feeling into awareness, without controlling, right? Without clinging, open awareness. And it's not indifference, right? It's indifferent for our culture, because our culture does not like passive things. Being passive, being submissive, these are bad things in American culture, right? So the yogini or the yogi who's just sitting there while everyone's protesting, right? They're just there, watching the mind. And everyone's like, what's that person doing there? What an idiot, right? What a simpleton. They're just sitting there like a Mahamudra practitioner or a Dzogchen practitioner. But at least they know their mind. Yeah, and so Lorena, to your point, yes, we have completely forgotten how to be. I mean, I think that as humans, right, like humans, we are animals. And when you go out into nature and you watch how attuned animals are to the world around them, right? So it's kind of a little bit like one of these Garden of Eden moments where you're like, oh, like we used to be like that. And I can't be like that because my own conceptuality gets in the way. Oh, that rock looks like a frog. You know, that frog looks like a rock. You know, that water looks warm. Oh, I wonder what kind of fish are in there. Blah, 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 blah. You know, that cloud looks just like a phoenix rising from ashes. That makes me think of this myth. You know, it's just like we are like cursed with this just blah, 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 kind of just, you know, thing. And so just stopping and being with no reference point, this is really hard. Yeah, just be a fucking animal. Chill the fuck out. Yes. Yes. That should be our cult tattoo. Yes, we're educated, we're domesticated, we're indoctrinated, all of these things. But it's not just the West, it's everywhere. This is a human condition problem, right? Like you know, as long as, you know, like some of the I can't remember it now, but there's like apparently like one of the most complex math problems ever was created in early India. It was called the bone crusher. It was so hard. Nobody could figure this thing out. You know, ancient Chinese culture, ancient Egyptian culture, ancient Greek culture, like all of these, like, you know, cultural, you know, precedents of just, this is the problem with us humans is we project onto everything. Oh, like, you know, the sky. So was it Nut, you know, the ancient Egyptian goddess of the nighttime sky? She must be like this, you know, and she's kind of draped over everybody. You know, on one level, this is the beauty, right? We create art, we create literature, we create poetry, we create all of this stuff. And then the shadow side is that we can't just fucking be. You know, we begin to all get depressed or anxious, or, you know, and hence the samsara. We create chaos and we create, the samsara, you know? Yeah. Yeah. So Matt says, well, and if we chill out, won't we be naturally compassionate? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and maybe language is the problem too. We should start the like anti-language political party. Somebody should run for president. That party. Everyone would just be quiet at the rallies. It'd be nice and peaceful. I would join that political party. No headaches, no arguing, etc. Yeah, poems we could do. We could just do spontaneous dance poems. Anyway. So then Maitreya goes on to say, as there is no desire for meditation, the result, Buddhahood, is accomplished. The yogin has no, or yogini has no thought, like a baby. She is like a bee experiencing taste in a garden. She is like a lion wandering from forest to forest. She is like various winds moving everywhere. If the mind has the appropriate manner, that is the supreme conduct. With an unceasing nature, behave like a mad person. By just encountering the essence of the mind, all various appearances, as they don't exist, is Mahamudra. Right, so I'm going to repeat this. As there is no desire for meditation, the result, Buddhahood, is accomplished. So stop clinging, grasping. Just rest into this direct presence, this open ease, this spontaneous isness. Isness is the business. The yogin has, or yogini has no thought, like a baby, right? And this is really like, you know, the one great thing I can say about being a parent is watching babies, right? And you don't have to, you know, be their parent to do this, but it saves you getting in trouble, getting too close to them, like in the park. As you will like watch babies behold things for the first time, and then maybe even for the second time, it's as if it's for the first time. You know, constant wow. It's very hard for us now because we know everything, right? I know everything. I'm so smart and well educated, etc. right? So to be like a baby, and actually this was a piece of advice my root teacher gave me. She said, in the future, if you're ever looking for a teacher, try to find a teacher who's like a baby. And I once told that to a psychologist, and they were just like, that sounds like a bad idea. But the point being, like, somebody who has, they're not jaded, somebody who's able to behold everything as if it's for the first time. Right. So to be like a bee experiencing taste in a garden, flying from flower to flower to flower. Right, like a lion wandering from forest to forest, like the wind, right? No barriers to the wind, right? The wind just moves as it does. Even if a barrier arises, the wind moves around it. If the mind has the appropriate manner, that is the supreme conduct. With an unceasing nature, behave like a mad person. Right? So don't follow convention because everybody else is following convention. Right? Don't just do everything because everything is being done. Just do, just be. Okay? By just encountering this essence of the mind, all various appearances, as they do not exist, become Mahamudra. Right? So it's like break open jadedness, break open labeling, break open assumption, break open desired outcome. Just smash all these things. These are like the idols that Muhammad smashed. Like let yourself just let all of these things go. I mean, expectation, right? Isn't expectation one of the half sisters of samsara, or at least the harbinger of samsara? To expect things to be a particular way. I expect this outcome. I need this to be this way. Of course, things are very infrequently like that. And then we're unhappy. And then we're triggered by that. And that causes more unhappiness, etc. Submission to the way things are is, the ultimate sub. Let Mahamudra be the Dom. The result, Buddhahood, arises whether there are appearances or no appearances. And if one thinks of it, the sacred city, all that is, outer and inner, the innateness becomes non-thought. Like a yoga, like a river flow. I like this one a lot. Sitting next to a river, right? And just watching the river go. Wow, it flows, goes the way it does. And it's not dependent upon me, thank goodness. Right? Buddhahood arises whether there are appearances or not. Who cares? Right? If one thinks of it, the sacred city, right, Mahamudra, all that is outer, inner, that innateness becomes non-thought, right? It is the mind of non-thought. It's a yoga that's like a flow of a river. There's nothing to do. No control to be, manipulated. No desired consequence. Who cares? When it's time to get up from sitting next to the river, you get up and you do what's next. Right? None of this depends on us. None of this depends on us. And then he goes on to say, there's nothing to seek elsewhere than the mind. Non-activity in the mind is the path of Mahamudra. If the result is not realized, that is Mahamudra. If non-realization is realized, it is like clouds in the sky. If realized, it is the nature of truth, the nature of emptiness. And the innate inseparability of view, meditation, conduct, and result. If non-duality is realized, That is the supreme result, Buddhahood. Right? So there's nothing to seek elsewhere. Of course, when I become desperate in my samsara, I always try to figure out, oh, when can I make it to India this year? That will somehow soothe my consciousness. But no, that's bullshit, right? That is me just, using international travel as a way to make myself feel better about myself. Non-activity in the mind is the path of Mahamudra, this ultimate sub, right? Just let it go. Stop trying to control. If the result is not realized, that is Mahamudra. Right? So stop trying to chase. Stop trying to, I've got to realize this today. Today is Tuesday, because I need to be enlightened by Friday. So the weekend is really cool. If non-realization is realized, it is like clouds in the sky. You're just there. No big deal. Just let them be, and they will be realized. If realized, it is the nature of truth, the nature of emptiness. And the innate inseparability of view, meditation, conduct, and result, if non-duality is realized, is the supreme result, Buddhahood. And so this completes the Doha song of the view, meditation, conduct, and result. It came from the mouth of the Indian Pandita, Master Maitreya. It was translated by the Tibetan Lochava, great scholar, Choki Lodro. Yes, so Lorraine asks, can we walk and do things when letting go? Absolutely, absolutely. Whatever we do. I mean, it's important to begin to take this off the cushion and take this out of the safety of our own homes, as it were, and take it out into the world, right? Or take it into chopping vegetables, or take it into, cleaning our bathroom, or take it into whatever it is. Doing takes intention. Does it?
I mean, I feel like if I'm already in like an open, like if I'm not caught up in the spin cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I can move without clinging.
Mm-hmm.
But so often, some of us, sadly, caught in the spin cycle. Like whatever we're doing, we're trying to do, right? There's an agenda.
There's something to do. Yeah. I mean, after this class, I need to pick up my kids from school. And if I'm like, hey, man, that's not so important, I'll just leave them there. That's not so good. Right. So there's obviously an action that needs to happen. Right. But so I'll walk to their school. And while walking, just walk. Right. And then while standing there with all the parents in our awkwardness, being there for one another, and also maybe trying to ignore one another at the same time in that New York City way, like there is intention there too, but then letting go. I think the thing is, right, is like, yeah, later tonight I'll make dinner for everybody, and there's intention there. And then after that, I don't know what will happen, but something will happen. And even when there's function to our activity, we can still engage it without that function becoming an issue, right? That function feeding samsara, right? For example, all of us happen to be here, Now we could say that because we've come together in this way, consciously, like this is somehow artificial, but it's not. It's kind of like everything comes together. All the things that came together to make my phone, right, came together, and this phone lacks any inherent existence. It's real, and you can like poke it and it does things, right? But is it the cause? I mean, and sometimes it's the cause of samsara, but it is not inherently that way. Just letting. The point is, we don't have to start from this place of completion where I have no intention to do this. We can start wherever we do, but we actually have a greater ability to actually let go completely in the moment than we think we do. So when I'm standing there waiting for the boys to come out of school, and I'm just like a simpleton, like a mute tasting sugar for the first time, like, oh, here I am. That's a way of it, engaging it as well. So when in the spin cycle, the most important thing is just learning how to drop that cycle, right? And the dropping, what's really fascinating is that when that dropping occurs and then there's spaciousness, where did the spin cycle go? Right? The spin cycle no longer has that same gravity. Does that...
Well, that's the trick. Like, I'm trying to figure out how to let go of it.
Oh, so who like what? Who
Without
is
making that an agenda? Also,
well? But I think if you put too much pressure on yourself to show up without effort, this is the thing about these songs. This is a little bit like going to like Jackson Pollock's studio is out in Long Island, and you can go there, you take tours. It is so amazing. And there's like his paint all over the floor and the walls, and nothing has really been touched. The old paint cans are still there. And so I can go there, and I love to go there. I try to go there as much as I can because I find it really inspiring. And it's intimidating because it's like, oh my God, like, here's this person who was a master at their craft, and we're seeing it now, right? And we can show up not as masters of our craft. We can show up still learning, right, and still figuring this out, and that is okay, and we just kind of piece it together. I want to get to Melissa's question because Melissa's hand was raised.
Okay, real quickly, I had put in Slack under General and Mahamudra, Brunholtz, who's a great translator of Dohas, is giving a free talk with wisdom and experience tomorrow night. They'll have it archived too. Just he's so great with Dohas. But I was going to ask something. There's not really time, and let's explore it another time. This is a great Doha. It's a digression. Really traditional old-time Buddhist teachers don't discourage social action, but they say you'll only cause confusion if you do that kind of action and don't realize emptiness. And, like the Buddha could kill the boat captain because he realized emptiness and could see that it was better than the karmic result of not doing that. And so I feel, this came up in the discussion when you were talking about Buddhist ecology and things like that, of there's this tension in Buddhists of those who want to do social justice, right? And because we're not realized, we act out of confusion, but we do our best. And those who feel that you have to be more realized to do social action, before you take that on, or it's just going to be more samsaric confusion. Maybe not discuss it now. We're already at time, but I just wanted to put that out there for another time, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, and that's a completely binary position too,
Right.
right? Like,
Yeah, it is.
you know, like, so um I think one of the reasons why I'm not too fond of this way of thinking is because there's this confirmation bias in this, right? Like, only realized masters can know what the appropriate action is. And the truth is with the environmental crisis, we know exactly what we need to stop doing, right? And with AI, it doesn't take an enlightened master to figure that stuff out. If I can figure it out, like, i.e., stop AI, you know, and I mean, really, like, I would venture to guess that a realized master might say, unless you know your mind, stop trying to make another one. Right? So I'm like, computerized mind. I totally get your point. I think the other reason why I'm not fond of this like line of reasoning is, the way Maitreya started the song. We all have Buddha nature, right? The enlightened masterpiece preferences the enlightened master, and this wisdom. I mean, the thing that makes Mahamudra and Dzogchen so revolutionary is that it is right there for all of us, right? And I think this is the key point, because then, I don't think there's one way, I guess, basically, right? Like, I think that line of reasoning preferences the old school orthodox way of doing things, and the old school orthodox way of doing things also really doesn't have a lot of experience with social justice, right? I mean, like, like, especially contemporary social justice, right? Like, and we can see this by, like, how many, like, old school, like, orthodox teachers are, like, pushing for trans rights, right, and other things like this, right? There are limitations, and there's culture as well, right? Cultural limitation that occurs too. So I think ultimately it should be everybody's, up to everybody's discretion as to, how involved they want to get or feel they need to be. But the one thing that human history we can also look to as a good record is that it is most likely the case that we will never ever find a system of governance that does not cause harm, because there never ever has been one. Tibet didn't have that. India didn't have that. Bhutan doesn't have that. I mean, people like to yammer on about, like, everybody who supports the king, but anybody who's been to Bhutan and has asked people what they really feel, you find out there's a different kind of situation, going on the ground. So I guess, and I don't want to go on forever, but but I do think that there's like a false dichotomy in that kind of argument. This world is shared by all of us. All of us have Buddha nature, so all of us should be invested in the liberation of it and everybody on it. And it shouldn't be reserved for, the highly realized people, because also, how do we measure that? Because that too, I mean, when the mind is edgeless and without center, we're talking about things that cannot be measured. And typically realization gets measured, especially in the tradition, in very small ways where there's, a lot of control. And it's not, my point being is that there are plenty of realized people out in the world who are not realized masters. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just pointing out that that's what I've seen evolve over time in that argument. And I agree culturally. I mean, Buddhism in America and its relationship to social justice is bound to be different because of the history of civil rights and slavery and the transcendentalists. So obviously it's going to take on a different form that Tibet didn't have. I agree, but I've just seen that tension. Although I do want to point out, there are people on the ultra right and ultra left who think of themselves as very spiritual, who are doing a lot of violence in all kinds of ways.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. Yeah. No,
yeah.
nobody has a, the right. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, Mahamudra and Dzogchen point out that there is no fixed vocation, right? There is no, and this is the point. Yeah. I mean, all you need to do is go on Facebook and you will find Vajrayana, like proponents of a Vajrayana theocracy. And then you will find people who are proponents of a Vajrayana anarchy, right? And both are kind of irrelevant, right? They're both are definitely unrealistic. Both of these things are equally unactionable, so just because something can be argued doesn't mean it's even necessarily worth the paper it's written on, unfortunately, but the confirmation bias thing, maybe one day we can do, like, I would like to one day kind of go through, there's a text by Gendon Chopo where he really critiques Tibetan culture and Tibetan Buddhism for its constant confirmation bias, and how hard it is to actually truly achieve awakening because of the way we use our religious practice as confirmation bias to confirm the faith itself. I mean, it's a real glaring kind of hypocrisy. And hence he ended up in house arrest and died in house arrest. So like, this is how, there were only a couple enlightened masters who liked him, one of whom was the second Dujum Rinpoche, right? But very few people were willing to get behind his way of thinking. Yeah, and the illiteracy rate as well was, was quite horrid. So anyway, on that really lovely note, we can dedicate the merits that all beings are able to be literate, all beings are able to not have their limbs chopped off as penal punishment. May all beings be able to develop a view that is free of confirmation bias. Right? And may we be able to rest into this natural, spacious ease in everything we do. So thank you so much, and excuse the siren in the background, and I'll see y'all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.